Don't look now. TCU baseball's won 7 of their last 8. TCU men's basketball, ups and downs on the transfer portal front. Women's basketball is doing great. Football's landing some commits as well. We're going to talk about all of that and maybe even a little bit more right now on this episode of Frogs Insider. Hello and welcome in. This is Frogs Insider. I am Jamie Plunkett. She is Melissa Treebwasser. We are your hosts this evening, breaking down all of the latest news and information happening around the world of TCU athletics. Melissa, we got a lot to talk about tonight.
Yeah, and I got another new mic, so I hope that at some point that this works because I've about hit my mic buying budget for the year, I think. So,
Well, I'm wondering now because we're having a similar issue.
yeah,
Yeah, and this
Am I
wasn't
too?
happening until I hit record.
Of course, that's how these things go.
Oh, it might be a cable. It might be a cable thing.
Yeah, maybe it's a bad cable. Maybe I just need to eat the microphone, and that will
Eat
help
the mic.
things. I'll
Eating the
just
microphone.
Eat the mic. Yep.
That's fine.
Yeah,
It's all good. Anywho, Melissa, we've got so much to talk about. Very excited to talk about TCU baseball as they sweep Baylor this past weekend. We've got some basketball news. We've got some football news with some commits rolling in, which is pretty nice to see. They've got a little bit of recruiting momentum right now after a spring where, in volume, they didn't really lose a ton. You can argue about losing Dom Williams and the damage that causes across the defensive line, but like we're going to get into, a little bit of replacement help coming in on that front as well.
A big amount of replacement help.
Yes, very excited. Beefy. We got some beef to talk about, which is always a good thing. But first and foremost, shout out to Hell's Half Acre Stadium Goods, our sponsor for the podcast. Thank you, Melissa. Obviously, repping them this evening. Very nice. That's
new sweep shirt
great
out.
shirt, and yes, there's a new sweep shirt out that features the great and wonderful Lane, who has started a boring chant this year every time an opposing pitcher throws over to first base. So there's a shirt that memorializes that. A wonderful, wonderful design. If you want to get over to hellshalfacresg.com and buy that shirt, it is pretty freaking cool. And I'll tell you this, because I was down there in Waco this weekend, Melissa, she had them Bears fans rattled.
Of course she did.
Fully rattled. First of all, I don't know, you've been watching most of the baseball broadcasts this year. I know that it is something that comes through the broadcast.
Oh, yes.
Like you can very distinctly hear her screaming boring every time there's a pickoff move. But something very funny happened this weekend where there was a moment, I think it was on Saturday afternoon, where a Baylor pitcher had thrown over 3 or 4 times in a row to first base, and she's just hitting him 3 or 4 loud borings in a row every single time. And a Baylor fan got so frustrated that he, an adult male, screamed from across the stadium, "Please stop."
I mean, she's how old?
Please
She's
stop.
like 10.
I don't know. She's like 10.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh, that's God bless.
but then it's like all of the Baylor fans came together on Sunday, and they said, "We've got a plan. We've got a response, a rebuttal, if you will, to the boring chant that this TCU child is just taunting us with." And that was to do it every time a TCU pitcher threw over to first base.
So steal the 10-year-old's chant and chant
Yep.
it back. That's your trolling.
To which she shouted out in reply, "Rent free." Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes. It was
I adore
so
just
good. It was so good.
That is-
was the cherry on top of an absolutely fantastic weekend for baseball, going down to Waco and sweeping Baylor and just fully dancing in the side of their skull as well.
I mean, listen, does it concern me that 10-year-olds are saying things like rent free? 100%. Am I going to put that concern aside to celebrate just exceptional trolling by a unit, by the way, of fans that started out the weekend doing the Aggie Ball 5 chant?
Yes.
At which point I wanted nothing to do with them for the rest of the week. Like, it is a great chant at Bluebell Park. I have been there, heard it, when the Aggies do it, like as they do everything, they do it way over the top and annoyingly, but it's their thing and it's great when they do it. Hearing it from the 14 Baylor fans in attendance on Friday night made me lose a lot of respect for them.
Look, I'll tell you this. I was a little surprised, and I've noted this, I think, before on the podcast about Baylor used to be like a respectable baseball school.
Yeah.
The program was really good for a long time. Fans showed up. They were there in droves. That was not the case this weekend, to the point where I got there on Friday and it was like 50-50 TCU to Baylor fans.
Yeah, it's
And it's not like, and it wasn't full. It wasn't even remotely close to full. I would say maybe 20% capacity at most on Friday night, at least at the start of the game. But still, I was a little surprised. There was also a softball game happening across the parking lot, so that probably pulled some fans away. But it didn't get much better on Saturday and Sunday attendance-wise. And so that compounded, the boring chant, obviously. And, when you had the little huddle of 6 Baylor fans who were actually vocal, trying to do the ball 5 chant, trying to get Let's Go Baylor started, doing other chants from other schools that they had co-opted. And it was really kind of a sad state of affairs from an energy and atmosphere standpoint. Not to mention, this is my gripe. You've been down to Baylor for a football game.
Yeah.
The
Multiple.
media spread is
Unbelievable.
admittedly one of the best I've ever experienced.
Unbelievable.
It's phenomenal. They feed you incredibly well. Fountains and fountains of drinks. Dessert spread is a mile long.
Bluebell freezer.
Yep. A whole freezer of Bluebell. The media spread at Baylor baseball was like Russian prison levels bad.
Did they not even give you because I think TCU baseball? Do they still do like coupons, right? So
You can go get food, whatever.
Yeah.
Shout out to Brandy Davidson for that, because I think that's a
Best.
great setup when
Yeah.
you don't have a ton of space to work with like you
Yeah.
do at TCU. Would have been a pretty logical conclusion for Baylor to come to, but no. The reality is while you have this beautiful spread for football and basketball, when I was down there this year for
I've
the
been there for
men's
basketball.
game,
Yeah.
it was like, hey,
Right.
we don't have a lot of space, but we got boxes at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Sweet, that's fine. I'm not asking for a ton. I'm there to do work. I'm not there to, feast on a 5-star meal. Baylor baseball, it was like, hey, man, here's a box of the saltiest popcorn you've ever had in your life and a Mountain Dew. Good luck. Like, that's it. There was also, next to all of the stacks of boxes of popcorn, a soft pretzel wheel thing going. And you're like, oh, cool. There's a sign on it that says, for suite and VIP guests only.
No.
And as I walked over there the first time, and I was just kind of I was reading the sign, learning that I was not the target audience for the soft pretzels. And a security person working there, lovely woman, talked to her quite a few times over the weekend, said, oh, those aren't for you. Those are for the VIP and suite guests. I said, thank you. I just read the sign that relayed that information to me as well. And it's a good thing, because I've heard that there is a national soft pretzel shortage. Got to protect and take care of your
Those
own.
Costco soft pretzels that
Really
they
need
bought
to,
frozen.
And the little to-go cups of mustard as well. God forbid a lowly member of the opposing team's media get a salty
keep your
piece
hands
of
off,
bread.
Peon from Fort Worth.
So,
hey, listen.
tough scenes.
Before we get to what happened on the field there, we took a lovely tangent from Hell's Half Acre. We didn't quite get to finish.
Oh, whoops.
I do want to add, in addition to supporting our incredible sponsor and how much we appreciate Hell's Half Acre, I do also want to add that if you want to hear the Baylor perspective of how pathetic their media spread is, you can catch Between Two Bears, as well as a podcast for literally every other D1 program in the state of Texas, on the Republic of Football Network, which is a part of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football Network. I know I just got my renewal for my magazine a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
That will be coming out this summer. We've talked about the hard work that the guys and gals over there are doing to get ready for that big summer issue. It's something we all look forward to. We appreciate their support. We love that they cover every football program in the state. And the Little Frogs Insider gets to be a part of that. It's been a lot of fun being a part of the Public Football Network. We're excited for the fall, where we'll hopefully get to do some more crossover episodes and different things with folks. Football season makes that a little bit easier, and with a really Texas heavy schedule for TCU this year. I don't know who we're going to get from Long Island University, but we'll get to chat with a lot of our cohorts on the Texas Football Network. So appreciate them. We appreciate Hell's Half Acre. We hope you guys will head over to halfacresg.com in order to check out their goods. Maybe in time for a baseball postseason run, because Jamie, as you alluded to kind of at the beginning here, the Horned Frogs have once again seen the calendar turn to May and decided to kind of get on their horse a little bit when it comes to baseball. And great weekend for TCU, but it's really just another in a pretty good last couple of weeks for the Horned Frogs, who look like they're finally starting to play up to their potential.
I think when we were talking about this team 5-6 weeks ago, when they were sitting there at 5-10 in the Big 12 and had just gotten swept by Cincinnati, the conversation, obviously we had started having a conversation about shifting expectations and what's reasonable. And we talked a lot from then to now about, hey, they just need to get into a position where they're top 10 in the Big 12 so that they can make the Big 12 tournament, because that's really the first step at this point to recovering any kind of aspirations in the postseason. And so going into this weekend, it was pretty critically important, because with series wins over Texas Tech and Kansas State, they had started to dig out of the hole a little bit, but they were still sitting there in 11th place, a half game behind Baylor, who was sitting there in 10th. Top 10 teams get in. And so it was important for them to take at least two. Realistically, you wanted all three. And so to come out on Friday night and do what they did, and then to repeat that effort on Saturday and Sunday to lock in the sweep, not only jumps them ahead of Baylor, but it actually moves them all the way into 8th. And they're a half game behind Kansas State for 7th, who they also have a tiebreaker over. So they put themselves in pretty good shape. There could be some weird stuff if they don't take care of business in 2 weeks against West Virginia. Obviously, it's not anything that's locked in yet. But they've started to kind of claw their way back into controlling their own destiny, which for the last month or so, it felt like that was completely out of the realm of possibility. And so it was nice to see them come into a weekend that they knew was really important, bear down and take care of business, and come away with... Bear down is Arizona, not... Well, anyways,
I know, but I just... Still.
They bagged a couple bears. Hey, this another tangent. Who would you rather be left in the forest with, horned frogs or bears? Anyways,
I thought you were going to ask me the question. I was like, I don't need any help getting myself in trouble with TCU fans these days, so let's not.
But yeah. But anyways, they take care of business this weekend. They sweep Baylor, and now they're in a much better position. And you could almost see when I was talking to Sarlos after the Sunday game, and it was a quick conversation because the rain was rolling in, but I did just say, hey, how important was it to get all three rather than just come away with a 2-1 win? And he said, we thought about a couple weeks ago talking to the team about where we were in the standings, about the fact that only 10 teams get into the tournament this year because of the expanded conference, that hey, we're on the outside looking in right now. This is kind of where we need to position ourselves to have a good shot at making this tournament. And he said they ended up deciding that they didn't really need to have that conversation with the team because they had started to play a little bit better. The bats were coming alive, and they thought, hey, these guys get it. They understand what we're here to try and do. And it took a lot longer for some of these pieces to fall into place, but they're starting to. And so I liked that response from him. He looked a little bit relieved to have come away from Waco with all 3 wins. It felt like things started to click for some guys this weekend that maybe it hadn't been in previous weeks. And so I think they've put themselves in a great spot. And now it's about taking these last 2 weekends. One is non-conference and one is West Virginia, and just closing out as strong as you did in 2023 to give yourself the best shot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd agree with you that they put themselves in a great spot. I think that what they've done is they've dug themselves out of a very deep hole to give
Mm-hmm.
themselves an opportunity to compete. But more importantly, and I think this is kind of what you were alluding to, is that they're starting to play the way we expected them to play, and that's ultimately the only thing that matters. Doesn't matter what your seed is going into the Big 12 tournament, other than I don't think TCU has to win the tournament to get in the postseason. I do think they probably have to win a couple of games. But would I rather them be in second or third place and have a regional hosting bid locked up? Yes. But if they continue to play this way, do I have confidence that they can not only compete to win a Big 12 tournament championship, but also be ready to be a competitive program in the postseason? Yes. It's still not perfect. There's still some flaws. The starting rotation still has some question marks. And Kirk Saarloos alluded to that during the broadcast when he was interviewed by the Baylor announcers. But you're like you said, you're starting to see some things. The offense was timely. They got bailed out a little bit. With the grand slam late, but that kind of woke the bats up for the rest of the weekend as well. So took a close game into a blowout and then paved the way for a couple other blowouts. Falling behind 6-1 is not ideal, but I almost think that winning the way that they did on Saturday probably pays way more dividends than if they had just strung together 3 really complete games, because they needed to have that confidence that they could play from behind and that their bats could get them back into a game when needed, because we haven't seen that happen very often. We haven't really seen them play from behind much since the first weekend of the season. So there's a lot to be encouraged about. I think there's still some question marks in the lineup. You talked about this in your Monday Morning Manager about the errors kind of sneaking back up, and like we mentioned, there's some starting pitching issues to figure out. But you get really excited about the bullpen. You get really excited about guys like Logan Maxwell and Sam Myers. Luke Boyers had a great weekend. Curtis Byrne had some big hits. You started to see guys that you needed to be great offensive players play great offensive baseball. I still don't think this team can do anything exceptional until they get guys like Anthony Silva going. Carson Bowen starting to turn it around. I think that helps, but I think you need Silva. I think you need Chat. I think you need a little bit more consistency out of some of those kind of veteran leader type guys if you want to really not just make the postseason, but win once you're in it, especially if you're gonna have to go on the road and do it. But baseball is probably the most contagious sport in the world, and we've seen the contagious good at the beginning of the season. We've seen the contagious bad for the last several weeks. Maybe now a couple of these guys getting hot kind of spurs a couple other guys to get their confidence back as well.
For sure, and I think you made a good point. It was a couple of weeks ago. It might have been after Kansas State on Friday night. We chatted with Carson Bowen after the game, and he said that he had called. Oh my gosh, who had he talked to? Cole Fontenelle about last year's team, and he's like, "Hey man, what did we do? What did we change to go on that run at the end of the year?" And Fontenelle told him, "We didn't change or do anything different. We just all of the work that we had been putting in all season finally started to cash in, and we all got hot at the right time." And it's like you said, everybody kind of fed off of each other, and that's what made that run so magical and what made it even happen in the first place. And so I agree. I think that we're starting to see some signals that maybe that could be popping up again. And I think my biggest question mark coming out of this weekend still is that consistency in the starting rotation. The errors have come and gone this year. They've seemed to be able to mitigate the damage caused by those. They especially did so this weekend. But the inconsistency in the weekend starting rotation, I mean, we're talking about 2 weekends left in the season at this point, and there has never been a point this year where the weekend rotation fully felt settled. And it's hard to go into a weekend with any kind of confidence that you're going to be able to put a complete weekend together if you don't even know who's going to be starting on Saturday or Sunday. And I think we saw 3 or 4 guys, put their best foot forward for that opportunity to follow Tolley in the rotation. But I still think that that's probably the biggest question mark at this point.
Well, and it's something that we've seen some of those guys specifically put their best foot forward, get into the rotation, and then not be successful, and that's why we're still in this. And I do think that that is ultimately what prevents this from likely, from having a chance to legitimately be a College World Series team is you can't consistently find three guys that can give you 5+ innings, and to make that run, you really need four. And Tolley has consistently been awesome. You hope that Cole Klecker maybe turned the corner with his performance. You saw Zach Coyer has probably been TC's most consistent bullpen arm, but he really threw together a good stretch too on Saturday. Luis Rodriguez gave up a lot of hits, but did a great job of mitigating damage on Sunday. He pitched himself into trouble, but then he pitched himself out of trouble, and he had that big breaking pitch working. Listen, Baylor's bad. I think we need to say that. It doesn't need to be said. It was, if you watched, but he had some of those batters looking absolutely lost with that big sweeping breaking ball that he had knees just buckling all over the place. So, again, you've been like, as much as I've wanted to give up on this team a couple of times over the last few weeks and been like, man, they're out of runway. You've consistently just harped on there's too much talent for this team to not be performing better than they are. We saw that in a pretty good volume this weekend. You saw the arm talent that some of these guys had, but you said it's not going to matter if they can't consistently put things together. And you got 2 weekends left. You've got a really bad non-conference team coming in that you almost have to sweep because they're what's it called, is so low.
RPI.
Yes, their RPI. Thank you. Is so low that they're gonna, like, a loss. It's a good team to be coming to town for a team that has some things to figure out. It's a bad team to be coming to town at the time of the year when you really could use an RPI bump. But I don't think TCU expected to need an RPI bump at this point. And then you got West Virginia, who has really, much like TCU, been kind of hot and cold this season, but sits well above them in the standings. And so you've got to sweep a series and win a series is kind of how I look at things heading into the Big 12 tournament, and hope you can make some noise down the road in Arlington, a place where TCU just happens to play really, really well historically.
They do, and you hope that familiarity with that stadium gives you an advantage. It's why they play early season tournament there every year. It's why they get over there to have practices in the fall. It's for that purpose of being familiar with that space come tournament time. It worked out in a major way last year.
Yeah.
They seem to always be able to go on a little bit of a run in Globe Life, and so you again hope for the opportunity to get there and to do that. I think, we kind of talked around some of these arms that had good performances. Cole Klecker, I thought, looked much more like the Cole Klecker of old in his relief appearance on Saturday. Yes, Saturday. 4 innings. No hits. I think just 1 or 2 walks. He kept the ball down. He didn't give up as many fly balls as we've seen him get up this year. And on a weekend where the ball was very easily traveling out of the ballpark, he did not even come close to allowing a home run, which has been one of his bugaboos this season. So I really liked what I saw from him. The fastball was working. He added a cutter to his arsenal this year. That was working really well. The slider kept guys off balance. But for the most important thing for him was that he was staying down in the zone. And that was really, really good to see. Zach Coyer, you mentioned him as well. He had all of his pitches working, and when I talked to him after that Saturday performance, 5 innings of work. I think he only gave up 3 hits, 1 earned run, which was in his last frame of work before he gave way to Ben Abelt in the 11th, who I know you want to talk about this podcast as well. He said himself he felt like all of his pitches were working better than they had his last few outings. And it was apparent. I mean, he looked much more confident on the mound. He was commanding the strike zone. Louis was commanding the strike zone too, which had been one of his problems. He was trying to nibble rather than just throw strikes. I think 69 or 70 of his 92 pitches were strikes, which is a really good percentage. And so, yeah, I think that those arms really showed you what they've got, and it's not like it hasn't been there. It's in them. It's been in them all year. They just haven't been able to draw it out as consistently as they've wanted to, or anybody watching has wanted them to. If they can find a way now to continue that, whether that's carrying that same pregame routine, that same mentality when they take the mound, whatever it might be, the lessons that they're getting from Dave Lawn and Kirk Saarloos, you got to repeat it because it's that time of year where it's all hands on deck, and those are going to be some of the main guys. I would be pretty surprised if at least one of Cole Klecker and Zach Coyer weren't starting this weekend against New Mexico State. Obviously, you've got Tolley going on Friday. I think Lewis did enough to get another weekend start. Even though, like you said, he was kind of fighting demons the whole time. He didn't have a single clean inning. There was always at least one guy on base. And then either Cole or Zach gives you that Sunday start.
I think you've got to go. I think you've got to go with Cole. I think Zach has been great, but again, because you have 2 weekend starters who have not been able to consistently string together consecutive good starts, Coyer is a known quantity in that role. That he is a known guy who can give you long or middle relief, and who is very rarely not delivered on expectations.
Yeah.
So as much as he deserves the opportunity to start, you've got to who are you going to go to out of the pen if Klecker or Louis get off to a rough start. And I hate to do that to the kid because he probably wants to start, but he's been too good in that role, and I don't know who else you really trust at this point to go long relief if you're only going to get an inning or 2 out of your starter. Yeah. And hopefully that's not an issue, but I would love to have him available because, again, I think this is a must sweep series, which kind of brings me to the point that you just brought up. Ben Abel came in all 3 games, closed all 3 games, through less than 40 pitches, I think, combined 37 over the course of the 3. But we had a little discussion in the group chat. It was mostly you and I, and then Grant popped in with his
4 total words.
Yeah, 4 total words. So I was concerned, and again, I'm not accusing. I don't know. I've never pitched as a baseball player, so I don't know what this is like. And I trust Kirk Saarloos. I trust the TCU athletic staff to do right by the pitchers. But I thought it was really unusual to see Ben Abel come in all 3 games. You had a great line in your Monday Morning Manager about the last time that happened was 2014. And that was that Riley Farrell, right?
Against Texas, yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, a lot of it, so I kind of said, I don't feel like this is a normal thing to happen. I don't know if it's a good thing to happen, to warm a guy up and have him throw in high leverage situations on 3 consecutive days. I was just interested, again, not accusatory, but interested. And so I kind of looked it up, and I saw the MLB official guidelines for pitchers in the 18 to 22 is they should not throw 3 consecutive days in game situations. And TCU hasn't done it in 10 years. Now, a lot of that is circumstantial. There's not a lot of opportunities that you're going to need 3 saves in a weekend. That just doesn't happen very often in baseball. But I also understand that, I think the word I used was desperate. And I don't think it's wrong to classify TCU baseball as desperate right now. I think that's a fair classification. And it did feel kind of desperate. Now, Ben's pitch count on the season is pretty low. He hasn't been used a ton. He's only thrown back-to-back days, twice this season. He's only thrown back-to-back days 5 times total in his career. So it's not like he has a bunch of overuse. You were very adamant that you had no problem with it. I don't know if you got a chance because of the shortened interview. I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet, but did you get a chance to ask Kirk about using Ben 3 days in a row, or was that just okay? What was?
Yeah, I did, and I hear what you're saying about concern for using a kid 3 days in a row, and my argument wasn't coming from a place where it was like it's fine and as in like it's a great thing to be doing, because it's not an ideal situation when you've got to go to your closer 3 days in a row for a variety of reasons. And Sarlo said after the game, he's like, well, we didn't want to use him today. And when you get to a Sunday and you have an 8-1 lead, it's also not in the back of your head like, oh, we might have to use our closer today. So there were some other kind of issues that led up to having to go to Ben Abelt in a game where you were leading by 7 runs. But I think that the worst mistake you can do when you are a desperate baseball team, when you are trying to get every single win that you have to have, is in a moment where you need your closer, you don't go to your closer. And I think the issues that presented themselves at the bullpen on Sunday specifically show you why Ben Abelt is not a starter and is
Yeah.
still the closer.
Yeah.
Because they got good bullpen appearances from Hunter Hodges and Ben Abelt on Friday. They got good bullpen appearances from Klecker and Coyer and Abelt on Saturday. They got really shaky bullpen performances from a couple guys that they're going to need in the postseason, but maybe just for 2 outs instead of 5, right? You had Cademan Parker have to come in with the bases loaded and 1 out, and he got out of the inning. He got out of the inning just fine. He got into some trouble the next inning, so you had to go to Chase Hoover. Hoover gets you out of that jam after a couple runs come in to make it a closer game than it should have been. And then Hoover gets into some trouble an inning and a half later, and so you have to go to your closer at that point. Fortunately, they got some insurance as well. Shout out to Carson Bowen for his 4 RBI day, because those 2 runs in the top of the ninth were huge. But at the end of the day, the worst thing that I think could have happened in that situation would have been to not go to Ben Abelt and to somehow watch that game completely fall apart, and then you lose that game. And now you're not in 7th, you're still in 9th. Baylor's only a half game behind you, and they've got 6 conference games left to your 3, right? So and on top of that, they don't have a midweek game this week. So he's got extra time to rest. Like you said, his usage hasn't been that high this year. It's still not an ideal situation, but I'm comfortable in that moment going to Ben, knowing all of the kind of surrounding data that they're working with, especially when you consider who they're playing this weekend.
Yeah.
And frankly, like, if we're being honest with ourselves, New Mexico State is a decent ball club. You might just roll Ben out there to get live reps once this weekend. But if you need him in multiple high leverage situations this weekend, other things have gone wrong again.
Yeah.
And so I was confident and comfortable with them going to Ben that 3rd day in a row with all of the other circumstances, even though it is not in any situation an ideal one to have to go to, you know.
Yeah, and I think you hope that it doesn't have to happen again.
Sure.
But I think, that there's probably some thought of that too, of we haven't used this kid a ton this season. And we may get in a situation, let's see how much we can kind of push this safely ahead of the Big 12 tournament, where you might very well be in a do or die. You have to win the whole thing, or you have to at least advance to the championship game or close to it to be in the postseason. I don't think they've released the updated projections today, but the last one, TCU was kind of in that, the first 4 out, kind of last four in kind of range. And so they are certainly still playing for their season. And like I said, a series you got to sweep this weekend. And then you really need to take 2 out of 3. Plus, you get Baylor in a midweek game too coming up too. So that doesn't count for conference standings, but again, just another confidence boost. They come to town. So a lot of work left for TCU baseball to do. Definitely some encouragement. And I think you like to see that the guys that you came into the season thinking you could trust, you now feel again after this weekend, okay, these are the guys who we thought they were. We'll see if they can repeat it. Like, that's the big thing now. That's a lot of baseball talk. We opened the show with baseball because baseball is the most important sport right now. It is the sport that is being played, but it is not the only sport that has action. And we talk about closing, Jamie. There have been some issues potentially closing when it comes to the transfer portal. And I know TCU fans have been in an uproar because they feel a little bit like maybe SMU is kind of eating their lunch in a little bit of ways, but you tend to know a lot more of what's actually going on behind the scenes. And so let's talk a little bit about men's basketball. A bunch of visits over the last couple of weeks here. And a couple guys I know TCU is super, super interested in. What can you update us on what Jamie Dixon and company are doing to fill those last couple roster spots that remain empty?
Yeah, so to kind of reset the table here, they're looking for, at this point, shooters. They've got, and some bigger bodies. They've got Frankie Collins, a guard from Arizona State. They've got Noah Reynolds, a guard from Green Bay. They've got this kind of guard-forward hybrid in Brendan Wenzel from Wyoming. And they're looking to fill out with some bigger bodies, some shooting, some three-point shooting capabilities. And there's still some really good players out there in the portal that they're talking to. A couple names that I mentioned last week have chosen other destinations, right? So Khalif Battle was on campus last week. He was the Arkansas kid. He visited Kansas State. It always kind of felt like Kansas State was the leader, and then all of a sudden Villanova and Gonzaga got involved, and he ends up as a Zag.
Which I thought was so interesting.
Really interesting. I like the fit with him and
Yeah.
Mark Few. I'm also personally very thankful that if he's not going to be a Horned Frog, that he's
Not
not
gonna be a
also going to be in the
Wildcat.
Big 12, because that guy is an absolute hooper. And hey, it's better to have him at Gonzaga than torturing TCU next season. Another name is Matt Cross. You mentioned the SMU stuff. Matt Cross, I got word on Thursday night that things went really, really well with Matt Cross's visit to TCU. And normally when I get that kind of info, not just from kind of the normal people that I talk to, but from some national folks that reach out, it's, hey, okay, that's things are probably trending in the right direction for TCU with this kid. And then I'm on my way back from Waco on Friday night, and I see a notification pop up that he had committed to SMU. Look, it's an NIL based world, right? And if a kid's gonna go and look for, an opportunity at a certain place because of certain reasons, I'm not going to blame a kid for doing that. I think that might be partially what happened in this instance. I think he was going to be a starter at TCU. I think he's going to be a starter at SMU. He was also going to be a starter at Iowa, which was another one of the schools that he was considering. So, TCU, got outbid by SMU there. I think and I wrote this on the board. I think that it's generally technically a good thing that TCU doesn't let players or other schools dictate what they're willing to give a kid. But that also, the double-edged sword there is that while you're not maybe going to overpay for a ton of kids, you're also going to lose out on some guys that you probably really want. And I think that's the case with Matt Cross, because he's a good shooter. He's 6'8", 225. Like, he was going to fit that 4 role really well, but he's going to be playing in Dallas instead of Fort Worth this fall. Another couple names. Anthony Delorso is a wing player from Campbell. He visited TCU this week as well. He also took visits to Virginia Tech, and not Wake Forest. Sorry about that. Vanderbilt was the fourth school. And I think TCU's in pretty good shape for him. He should be making a decision soon. I know that Virginia added a couple guys around his size and same skill set on Monday, the day that we're recording this. So I don't know how much they're in the picture anymore. I know that Virginia Tech still needs a guy. Vandy still needs a guy, and TCU does. And I'll be honest, this has been one of the harder recruitments to track, just because it feels like the guy doesn't talk to anybody. And when he's not talking to anybody...
Kind of refreshing.
Right? It's kind of nice.
It's kind of annoying for you, but...
Sure, but also, like, just the kid's going to make his decision, and we'll know when we know. So that's pretty cool. He's also, from what I understand, got a really small camp, and they don't talk to many people as well.
You're making me want this kid more, I'm just saying.
That tends to be the case with international kids, right? He's Australian. He's from Melbourne, and so... his circle is a little bit smaller over here in the U.S. and makes it a little bit more difficult to get information, not necessarily to recruit the kid. And then a guy that they have they're wrapping up an official visit with right now. Excuse me, is a kid from UNC Wilmington, a wing who's originally from Mansfield, Trezarian White. Who is a guy that TCU really wants. He shot 39% from three-point range last season. I don't think I mentioned Delorso's shooting percentage. He's a career 38% three-point shooter over the last 3 seasons. Second-team All-CAA for Campbell last year. Traz White, though, very good shooter, 6'7", 220-ish. Another big body that could fill that kind of Emmanuel Miller role that TCU's looking to replace. Great rebounder, good defender, kind of really just fits the system, it feels like, at TCU, but also maybe stretches the floor a little bit better than some of the guys they've had in the past. and that's really what TCU's looking for. And they got to find some bigs that can stretch the floor. They want to run a lot of pick and roll this year with Ernest Uday and these guards that they brought in. And in order to do that, you know better than anybody, Melissa, you got to create space in the lane, which means you've got to have guys who can shoot well enough that the defense has to respect them and move out of the lane. So those are some of the names that they're looking at. They've got a kid from Georgia State who's taking a visit later this week as well. A bigger bodied guard, 6'5", 200-ish. But I think it's pretty safe to say that White and Del Orso are their two main priorities at this point. And if those guys end up going different places, they'll have to pivot. White took a visit to Texas Tech over the weekend. I know that went really well. And then he's also planning on taking a visit to Kansas State. I don't know if his visit to Mississippi State is still in the books, and he's already canceled a visit to Baylor. But I think we'll probably hear his announcement sometime in the next week and a half, 2 weeks or so. So this could all be wrapped up pretty quickly. If certain guys decide to go elsewhere, TCU will pivot. There's a lot of talent still in the transfer portal, and they're going to fill the roster one way or another. But those are the names at the top of the list for now.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how Jamie, because there have been a lot of guys that have come through, a lot of guys that visit, a lot of guys we've seen targeted, and it is an NIL game right now. And some guys are going to look at fit and how they're going to develop, but a lot of these guys are probably saying, I'm probably not an NBA guy. I might be a second-tier international player, and they've got to maximize their income while they can, and have no problem with that. But it's really interesting to compare, and this is so TCU SMU anyways, right? It's so Fort Worth Dallas, the two philosophies here. They could not be more polar opposite places or philosophies. But TCU is like SMU reminds me a little bit of like NFTs or something, where they've got all the momentum of having been invited to a Power 4 conference. Never mind that it's one that's probably not going to exist in the next 5 years, but they finally got their invite they've been waiting for. They've got their boosters excited. There's nothing SMU, love more than throwing money at things for no apparent reason. They're really smart to capitalize and spend as much as they can right now to try to make these programs relevant in the ACC in year one. Because it's going to be hard, I think, for them to maintain that relevancy, especially when they're not getting the full media rights share or any media rights share initially. And then by the time they probably would qualify for that, the ACC might no longer exist. And so it's really smart of them to just try to win as much as possible and position themselves for whatever comes next. Yeah. It's frustrating as a TCU fan, but, and we'll talk about this a little bit too, much like kind of the Dom Williams courtship that we all saw unfold on social media. I don't necessarily expect nor maybe even want TCU to be the program that rolls out the Lambos and, the 5-star dinners and all of the fireworks and the chaos. Like, that's not who TCU is, and that's not how they're going to win. And so I would, even though it can be disappointing at times, to get guys that you don't see as being 5-star instant impact, massive All-American type players, and you feel like, man, we can't even close on those guys. What you're trying to do is construct a team that can be successful throughout the course of a Big 12 schedule, which is going to be, we cannot say it enough, but a beatdown in 2024, 2025. But you got to have guys that are willing to buy in, and especially in basketball, one guy who thinks, well, I got paid the most, I am the most important guy in this team, can really derail an entire program. And so Jamie Dixon is certainly looking for pieces that fit schematically, for pieces that fit skill set wise, but also guys that fit the culture. And that's one thing that we saw last year, we've seen the last several years. That program has had pretty dang solid leadership from within and pretty great culture. And that's why they've kind of stayed together through just incredible bad injury luck and different things like that. So I think that this is the right way of attacking things, even if it can be a little bit frustrating as a fan, because you want your roster composed and set and done, and you want SMU fans to not be able to hang over your head that they got a guy from you.
You're right. I think the biggest thing this offseason, you hit it on the head, is finding the right pieces and finding that culture fit for all of these guys. Because the reality of college basketball now is these guys have to not only learn to like each other, but learn to play together on the court in such an incredibly short amount of time. We saw some of the challenges early on in the season last year with TCU because, Jameer Nelson Jr. got on campus late, and Ernest Uday got on campus late, and Avery Anderson was banged up a lot in the fall, and Manuel Miller was banged up a lot in the fall, and all of a sudden you're in the middle of your non-conference schedule, and guys are still trying to figure out where they're supposed to be on the court when they've got certain packages that they're trying to run and all this other stuff. So the sooner that you can complete your roster, the better. The good news is that these are the final couple pieces to TCU's roster. They have pretty much filled out everything at this point. They technically, I think, have 3 scholarships left. I was told pretty clearly last week that they're looking to add 2 more guys out of the transfer portal. This is not uncommon to keep a scholarship free. They do this pretty much every year at this point. And with the number of young guys coming in, it's all about opportunity and playing time. You've got to allocate some of that, especially when you have a freshman class that's as big as TCU's with 4 guys coming in.
Yeah, which is super unusual now amongst the P4 and the transfer portal era.
And I think it might become more normal here in the near future simply because we have finally, I think, reached a point where nobody has COVID eligibility anymore.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that that's necessarily going to reduce the number of portal entries. It might, but I think guys are not going to have the same kind of workaround to get extra years anymore. And so you're going to know with confidence, hey, we want to bring in these 3 guys, these 4 guys, have an established foundation, supplement them with older talent out of the portal, and that's going to be the process similar to what we're starting to see with football. Now that things are maybe stabilizing a little bit. I think the transfer portal was way quieter this spring for football.
Yeah,
than
after all the
anybody
talk,
anticipated,
we thought
right?
that the buildings were melting down and everything was going to be on fire. And it was Dominic Williams, maybe the biggest name in the spring transfer. He was arguably one of the top 10 biggest names in the spring transfer portal. So, that's an interior defensive lineman commanding more attention than just about anybody else this time of year.
Quite a bit of attention, Melissa. And I think that's a great pivot into our final subject of the night, which is talking about football. Now that spring football's over, the transfer portal window is, as Michael Irvin, the fake Michael Irvin on the ticket would say, closed. So it's time for guys to find
I was not
homes.
anticipating that.
Yeah.
Okay.
If any of our DFW listeners who have listened to the ticket,
I know.
go to the YouTube channel.
P1s.
Go to this podcast episode on the YouTube channel and just type closed in the comments. Just leave me a closed. That's all I want. That's how I know the faithful listeners have gotten to this point in the episode too, is if you go to the YouTube channel, Frogs Insider, and type closed on this episode. But it's closed now, which means that nobody else can get in. Guys can still get out. It's not like a
it's a
liminal
vortex,
space
the black
where they
hole
just exist until it opens again. No, guys can still commit places, and we know that because TCU got a commitment out of the transfer portal from Houston. Hakeem, I have not practiced this last name. Hakeem Ajijalaya.
Yeah, we have not gotten our pronunciation guide yet.
I've not heard a pronunciation. He's off of the Houston roster already. I Googled him earlier today and couldn't find it. But Hakeem is transferring in from Houston. He is a defensive tackle. He's an interior defensive lineman.
He's a big old boy.
Which was a position of need. Now, he's not Dom Williams, right? Because you don't find a lot of 2-year starters in the portal in the spring. But he is what I believe to be a really good rotational piece that fits well with the other guys that TCU already has on the inside of the defensive line. He can eat up space like Dom Williams. He might not draw as many double teams, but he is one of those guys that can kind of create havoc along the line. He's a huge body that's a little bit unproven. But I think I really like this ad, Melissa, just because of the potential that you get out of a kid. It's a guy that TCU saw last year. And with, I think we talked about it about a month ago, some of the, quote unquote front office staffings that have happened. It's kind of it's a connection that makes a lot of sense in a lot of different ways.
Seems like a real high character guy too, a good locker room leader, a guy that's been around college football for a really long time, but still has a ton of tread on the tires, which I think is important at that position. Like you said, he's unproven. He has not played a ton of snaps. He's not put up big stats. I don't need a nose tackle type player to put up big stats. I need a guy who's willing to get in there, do the dirty work, take up space, eat the double teams. He can do some of the things that Dom did. He might not do them as recognizably, or I don't want to say as well, because I think that's an unfair way to classify, but I mean, I hate to throw away all the cliches, but this kid screams lunch pail kid, hard worker. He's got a great story. You've got to read up on it, on kind of his background, but
I do need to do that.
he's got a really great story, and he's worked really hard to get to this point, to get to this opportunity. Former walk on, I believe, became a scholarship player. So again, I think he becomes, whereas you can kind of slot Dom in to play 80% of the snaps at that defensive tackle position. He becomes more part of a rotation probably, but I think that's fine. I think that can be effective. And there are other proven commodities in that role. And like we said, when Williams first went to the portal in Andy Avalos' system, it's a four down, not a three down. So it's not quite as important that you have a superstar player. If you have guys that can execute, do their jobs, fill their gaps, and know their assignments, TCU's linebacking core is probably the strength of that defense this year, which is a crazy thing to say when you look at all the injuries the past 2 years. But if he can create lanes for those guys to rush and attack, and he can free space up for guys like Marcel Brooks and Shad Banks and these just like Nnamdi OBAs are these freak athlete guys, then he will be effective, if not as NFL buzzworthy as Dom Williams might be. So I think it's a really smart ad. Like you said, there are a lot of guys on TCU staff now that had experience at Houston last year. So they know this kid on the field. They know this kid off the field. There's no way he ends up at TCU if he didn't have glowing reviews. This was not a desperation pick in my mind. This was a smart, intelligent depth signing of a kid who can come in and be impactful and effective in his way, not necessarily in the way of the guy before him.
Sure, and I was listening to you talk, and I'm pretty sure I used a couple as well. We need to throw a cliche counter on the beginning of our conversation, because I think you and I both knocked out 4 or 5.
Easily.
So
yeah,
but
we'll work on that for the fall, guys. Don't worry.
Cliches are cliches because they carry some truth,
Yeah.
and I really like this addition. I think he's going to be a great rotational interior defensive lineman for TCU.
Yeah.
They also got a high school commit out of this weekend. Dylan Arkansas, a linebacker from Denton Ryan, super productive high school kid in the class of 2025. So this is kind of what we were talking about leading into this segment, Melissa, is you want to supplement out of the portal, you get depth out of the portal, but really, truly, the foundation of your team, bless you, you timed that.
Did I get that muted in time?
No, not at all.
I tried so hard. I couldn't find the mouse pointer. Oh, man, I'm so sorry.
I'm fairly certain the whole sneeze came out before the mute showed up on the screen.
God. I tried really hard. It got me so fast. I'm so sorry to the listeners that you had to hear that. We need a fine bucket for clearing your throat, sneezing, and cliches. We'll use it to buy the folks around at a potential future live podcast.
Some sort of live show. Maybe we regather at the pub on Saturday nights again this year. But like we were saying at the beginning of this segment, it's good to get depth and veteran talent out of the transfer portal. But the reality still is, in this new era of college football, that you will generally build the foundation of your program through your high school classes. And Dylan Arkansas absolutely 100% fits that mold. He's a talented linebacker that can come in and be a core piece of your defense, theoretically, for 2, 3, 4 years. And so I love this pickup. I think he's great. And it's really nice to see TCU finding what it seems to me, at least to me, finding their stride on the recruiting trail this spring.
Yeah, listen, anytime that you can recruit kids out of a program like Denton Guy or Denton Ryan, that's a great place to be.
Yeah, don't.
I can't mix those up.
Don't flip those.
That's very, very terrible. I apologize to all of my friends in Denton. But yeah, I mean, they're up to 8 commits now. You've got a top 30 class. You're still headlined by Ty Hawkins, which we're going to be on Ty Hawkins' watch now for the next, 8 months until he officially signs. But they've really constructed this with needs, but also just trying to go after really, really talented, really productive players. And I'm excited about this class. And if they can kind of hold it together, it has a chance to be to remain a top 30 class and maybe even sneak into that top 25. And for that, if TCU could have some success on the field this year, I think they have a chance to regain that high school recruiting momentum. And it's going to be so important to the future of that program, because the Big 12 is going to probably need to build teams primarily through the high school classes and just fill in kind of like what we've seen TCU do over this past year. So good to see positive momentum. great to see Sonny Dykes recruiting, the greater DFW area well, continuing to build his name in that community. It seems like he has a lot of respect among the high school coaches there. So this is a great commitment.
I'm excited about it. Two things to note. He is the second tie. No, he's not. Dillon, Arkansas. I botched this completely already.
Let's rewind
Here
this back. Okay.
What's really great about this commitment, aside from Dillon, Arkansas, in and of himself being a really good football player, is that he goes to Denton Ryan. You mentioned Ty Hawkins already as being as the kind of key piece to the 2025 class at this point. There's another guy who could potentially be a key piece to the 2025 class, whose first name is also Ty, and the tie-in here, see what I did, is that he is also that he goes to Denton Ryan, where he is teammates with Dillon, Arkansas. That is the 5-star offensive lineman Ty Haywood, who was on campus for a visit this weekend, had some FaceTime with Sonny Dykes and the rest of the coaching staff, and TCU is one of the, I think, 5 or 6 schools that he is still considering at this point, along with Bama, the big boys. And so, it doesn't hurt to have a teammate on board in this class, and obviously Ty Haywood is getting a lot of FaceTime. I saw him send out a tweet where it was a picture of him and Sonny. He was thanking the coaches for having a great time on his visit, and the other Ty Hawkins, was right under there with a little house emoji, just replying to that tweet. So it feels like there's a lot of really good momentum for this 2025 class that's building right now.
I'm in love with Ty Hawkins and 100% ready for him to break my heart, but that is my class of 2025 recruiting crush, and I will stay there until he ends up at TCU, and then I will not be creepy as a reporter when he. That's good. I will not. I will not Greg Doyle this thing. I promise.
If you did, we would have a different.
We would have a different conversation.
You'd be making Drake level diss tracks at this point.
You know what people want to hear from us, Jamie, is our opinions on Drake and Kendrick Lamar beef. We are the right two people to talk about rap beef.
I thought you'd never ask.
Yeah, you in your 30s, me in my 40s, just a couple of suburban white kids.
Kendrick is winning.
Oh, I don't even think that's a question at this point. Drake is just weird. I said it. And his music isn't good anymore, so I'm over it.
Dresses like Buzz Lightyear every time he comes out on stage. Anyways.
You've gotten me a couple times with some good ones today. Well, this, TCU news and notes, recruiting information, and your
all
social media commentary on rap beefs. That's what we're here for at Frogs Insider.
Yes, absolutely. Rap beef. That's what I'm going to call. I'm going to call it closer beef. We had a little bit of a disagreement over closers. We're going to the title.
Closer beef. Yeah, that'll be
closer beef.
Yeah, I'll drop my diss track in the comments.
Melissa. Oh yeah, Melissa's closer beef, and then in parentheses, Jamie diss track or Melissa diss track. That's what we're going to put under there.
Wow.
Okay.
Good day.
Well, we've I think come to the end of what this episode is going to be at this point, because we're 57 minutes in, and
what am I going to clip this week?
I don't know.
There's
Probably
so
this
much
part.
good stuff.
Probably
this. Just our rap opinions.
Content. Let's go.
Yeah.
I just got to remember to put it in the Dropbox folder. The first step's always the hardest, right?
Yeah.
The first workout's always the toughest.
Yeah.
All right. This has been the Frogs Insider Podcast. I am Jamie. She is Melissa. A big thank you to our current and hopefully still partners after this episode, Dave Campbell's Texas Football and Hell's Half Acre Stadium Goods. We love you both dearly and are thankful for your friendship and your partnership with us. If you haven't already, please go leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or somewhere else. Make sure you go over and subscribe at the YouTube channel. We are dangerously close to 300 subscribers, which feels like a small milestone, but still a really cool one.
Yeah.
And don't forget, comment closed on this episode. Until next time, when we will be back with more of the latest news and rap beef gossip. She is Melissa. I am Jamie, and we'll talk to you next time. Go Frogs.
Go Frogs.